Welcome back to the Simple Handicap Podcast. This is the NFL Week 3 recap episode. We'll also react to the opening odds to NFL Week number 4. If you listen to the podcast on Apple and Spotify and go, what in the world? There's no good morning? Live streaming on YouTube. A lot of folks in the channel watching the video. And so didn't want to throw off everybody who might be finding this now or afterwards with the good morning. It's been 7 years. I've never known how to open this episode efficiently. The day-to-day episode is very easy, but this one's always been kind of complicated. So as always, this is the episode after the Sunday games. We'll look back at everything that happened. We'll look ahead to the opening odds. We'll get my reaction for all of it, get my thoughts on all the games, and try to put what we just watched for 7.5 hours into a little bit of context. Ugly day. Started off with a lot of optimism. I thought things were going to be, it looked like one of those weeks coming into it. Just a lot of numbers in good spots. Felt good about the bets. Felt good about how everything was moving, and it just turned out to be a bit of a mess. Still some good bright spots, especially with the Carolina Panthers. We see that trajectory going up. We see it in the chat already. So that was fantastic. Denver Broncos get the spot done as well, but we'll talk about each game as we go through and figure out what we were looking at on an interesting and honestly like semi-boring from an entertainment standpoint NFL Sunday, but I'm sure we have a lot to come in the Sunday nighter. Releases, not good. We need Kansas City tonight on the side. That one will at least keep us treading water for the week. But other than that, it was a very tough afternoon at 1 p.m. Question about the microphone. Ordered the mic in, got it set up, had the mic stand ready, and we've just got a boost and power issue from the microphone. So hopefully we'll have the mic and audio situation sorted out. Hopefully for tomorrow. I've got the gear here. It's just electrical issue now that if I had a little bit of help, it would go a long way, but I'm trying to figure out what in the world is going on. I'm far from any audio engineer, so bear with me for the audio. I know it doesn't sound great in this episode, but we will continue trying to get it touched up and figured out as we go along. All right, start off with the first game on the rotation. LA Chargers 10, Pittsburgh Steelers 20. Big takeaway, it was a really good game for Justin Fields. 80% completion rate on his throws. Was asked to throw a lot of passes short. He did very well completing them, did very well managing the game. The Steelers outgained the Chargers by nearly 200 yards total, 5.3 to 3.7 per play, 4.3 per pass to 3.7, and up on nearly half a yard per rush. It was a clean sweep across the board per play in total. The Steelers finished plus 12% in net success rate. It was a very good game for the Steelers, but this is kind of what they have done for years against Greg Roman-led offenses. Now, Justin Herbert started the game red hot. He wasn't missing. Obviously, the task becomes a lot easier in the second half when he goes down for the Steelers defense and they're facing Heineke in the backfield. That's when the Steelers really took over. But it was hard to kind of ignore just how the injuries started to pile up for the Chargers. They lost Herbert. They lost Slater. They lost Joe Alt. The Alt injury seems less severe than what you're looking at for Slater. We'll see what comes of that. There was not a lot of official reporting, but this is a game that, quite honestly, it finishes 20-10. You had Harris going down on the 1 yard line at the end of the game. The Chargers just couldn't get the Steelers off the field, and Pittsburgh could have ran this score up a little bit more with that touchdown. They missed a field goal, albeit a long one. But in the second half for the Steelers, 12-play 6-minute drive, 12-play 6.5-minute drive, 10-play 5-minute drive. And I kind of leave this game wondering, are the Chargers defensively a little bit overrated because they played the Panthers, because they played the Raiders, and now they played the Steelers? What does this look like going forward? And obviously a big week 4 matchup on deck, but defensively you start to wonder if there's some issues there for the Chargers in the back. Chicago 16, Indianapolis 21. This game drove me mad watching it. Was looking at the Bears, was looking at the over. Neither of them get home. The Colts are an interesting team at this moment because defensively they allow so much, but 2 weeks in a row, they've really got away from it. And Chicago's an interesting team too because we started to see them play with tempo. You had Roma Dunze break out. Believe it or not, if you're just looking at this score right now, 21-16, you would just think at face value that this was a tough offensive game. It wasn't that at all. The Bears put up 395 yards. Caleb Williams threw for over 300 yards. This was a Bears offense that finally came to life, and they came to life still behind an offensive line just full of issues. I mean, they could not get any protection. The ground game was non-existent. which was surprising to me after seeing what the Packers did. It forced the Bears into the inverse of what Green Bay had success with last week. Caleb Williams had more than 50 attempts in this game. So Chicago puts up 395 on offense, but with all that said, they're outgained by a yard per play by the Indianapolis Colts, who continued to be extreme boom or bust. And we had a lot of boom. We had a whole lot of bust. That end zone interception thrown by Anthony Richardson, if you haven't seen it yet, was just one of the more head-scratching, unusual interceptions that you're ever going to see. There was another one that he threw, wasn't as much his fault. Caleb Williams with multiple interceptions, one bad one at the Indy 25. There was kind of a tip ball pick near midfield. So both teams were turning it over across midfield. That was the same thing that happened for the Colts last week. Indy just can't get a game where they're operating clean offensively. Anthony Richardson passing today, despite the Colts getting the 21 points, had a first percentile game throwing the football on EPA per play, which is just baffling to me because the Colts were moving the football. A lot of that came from the ground game, but just really this score line, this box score in terms of yardage allowed, yardage gained, just puts the Colts season into context in 4 quarters. It's been this for 3 weeks. It's really, really hard for me to understand what we're getting. I kind of feel more optimistic coming out of this game with the Bears as losers than I do as the Colts because I can't figure out what Indianapolis wants to do on offense. I don't understand the identity here, and they're trying to mix both ends, and I'm just not buying into either side. And all the pieces are there. The weapons are there. The explosiveness is there. But you just have just bizarre turnovers and decision-making in key spots. Yet they're finding ways to win games, even without DeForest Buckner, even without injuries in the secondary. Kenny Moore went down. You're still without Juju Brents. Like Kwity Paye got hurt later in the game as well. A lot of injuries piling up for the Colts, but the Bears just couldn't get it in the end zone, even when they're first and goal at the 4 straight runs, not getting in. They're leaving points on the doorstep. It's just been a weird season so far for Colts games. But boy, the way that they're moving the football, despite the turnovers and the way that they're giving up yardage, makes me think that they're very much an over team despite these lower totals. And I think Chicago offensively is going to continue to trend up, but certainly some bigger numbers put on the board. Houston 7, Minnesota 34. The scoreline here reads very true to how this game played out. The market loved Minnesota all week. There were releases on Houston at -2. It pushed it up. Every time the number was getting back to 3, there was buyback. Look ahead was 4.5, adjusted through the 3. And it's the second week in a row where the Vikings just hammered with money in the market. Houston opened up the game with a pick on the first play. They missed a field goal, and then they punted every single drive into the third quarter. Minnesota leads 21-0 in the third quarter. And I was reading tweets and following the tweet deck and putting things together as the game went on and looking at numbers. The tweet that really can put this game into context was that CJ Stroud just looked completely flustered on the sideline. And there's a video with his head in his hands. It's the second week in a row that we have seen a Flores defensive scheme give a quarterback a ton of trouble. And the reason this was surprising is because Stroud has been so good in his career at not being affected by the blitz. It obviously hasn't been a big jump, but his numbers haven't fell off. Today, completely fell off. The offensive line had issues. He couldn't get anything going. This game was not competitive, was over at halftime. The box score shows the Texans outgaining the Vikings by 0.1 yards per play, but that is just a disguise to how the game trended late, especially in the second half. This was out of reach later in the second quarter, and Houston was just never competitive, and things just died out late where the Texans had a couple drives to put up some yards, and Minnesota sat on the ball a little bit. So I'm not looking at this box score as being reflective of Houston deserving better. This was just another game dominated by the Vikings defense. And in some interesting post-game reviews and pressers from film guys giving their first thoughts, it was another game where the consensus was that Darnold was putting the ball in harm's way a little bit and getting away with it. But that was the same thing that happened last week. Kind of a little bit of a Darnold situation brewing like Baker Mayfield, who we'll talk about in a second. But that's something that I've seen now being reported from film guys for 2 weeks in a row. So when is it going to catch up to Darnold? We'll see. But for right now, a very explosive Vikings offense led by Kevin O'Connell wins again on the season. Shocker of the day is the New York Giants 21 on the road at Cleveland. who score 15 points, a 6-point win for the Giants on the road. And I'm laughing because I'm watching this game and I couldn't believe what I saw. First 40 plays for the Browns, they put up just 80 yards. The Commanders last week didn't punt, and that was a Commanders offense that was incredibly limited. The Browns got some bad news with Conklin not starting on the offensive line, but this was a game at home that the Browns certainly should have been a lot more competitive, and they were just a complete no-show in this game. And so the mystery comes back to, what are we getting from this Browns offense? What is Deshaun Watson? This is a bizarre one. But defensively, you start to see some concerns for the Browns as well. You think about week 1 at home, can't do anything against the Cowboys, and you get Daniel Jones coming in, who's been flustered, to put it lightly, as we're talking about CJ Stroud dealing with it, has been flustered and looking incapable of anything out of the pocket when pressured. And today he's looking completely poised and confident in the pocket. And this box score, incredibly one-sided. The Giants outgained the Browns by 1.5 yards per play, 2.9 per pass, and 123 total yards. New York finished with a 44% overall success rate, and Daniel Jones had a 67th percentile passing game against this Browns defense. Started the game, it's on 19 for 21. I don't have that confirmed, but that is a wild stat line if it is true. Neighbors, 12 more targets, 8 catches, 2 touchdowns. He is the entire offense. But Deshaun Watson in that pocket, sacked 8 times. Giants D-line, we know it's good, but just completely took over the game. Deshaun Watson was 7.5% below expectation. His expected QBR was just 17.5. So the Browns go up 7-0 after the Giants fumble the opening kickoff. And it looks like the route is on, but it's the Giants that hang 21 unanswered. And we don't see the Browns until later in the fourth quarter do anything on offense again. So it was just this 3-quarter absolute lull for the Browns after that initial play. And if it wasn't for a botched handoff at midfield that was completely clean, unpressured for the Browns, who were driving down 6, perhaps this game plays out differently, but the Giants get away with it and come away with a pretty shock win by 6 points in a game that they dominated for 4 quarters. Philadelphia 15, New Orleans 12. A ton to unpack here. This is the misleading box score of the week, but it's not necessarily a misleading result, the way the game played out. We'll try and make sense of all of this. Philadelphia outgained the Saints 460 to 219 yards. I mean, this is as one-sided of a game as we have seen since, well, we saw a very one-sided game on Thursday, but that scoreline was a whole lot different than this, yet it played out in a very similar manner. 6.9 yards per play for Philly to just 4 for the Saints. 2.9 yards per play advantage for the Eagles in this game. Massive. 5.9 yards per pass to 4.0, and 6.9 yards per rush to just 3.1. Complete one-sided sweep and dominance for the Eagles for 4 quarters. Yet, they needed to drive late in the fourth quarter to come back and get the win. So how in the world did we get here? How do we get to 15-12? What are we taking away from this game? So it should have never been this close, first of all, is what needs to be said. The Eagles had an end zone pick after a 66-yard drive early first quarter. Next drive, sack fumble at the Saints 40. Then instead of kicking the field goal on 4th and 1, which the analytics and the fourth down bots were making the pledge to kick the field goal, it was the right decision. Sirianni elects to go for it, which is another head-scratching decision from the Eagles head coach. They don't get it. So it's another empty Saints drive that ends at the 15. The final 3 drives for the Eagles in the first half go for 180 yards total combined, but just 0 points. In the same time frame, the Saints put up a total of 18 yards of offense, but led the game 3-0 going into the break. So this was all Eagles first half, but they're trailing. Come out of the break, it's got to be different, right? Here come the Eagles, third quarter. Not the same thing can happen, right? Exactly. They go back to it. 38-yard drive that stopped on downs. So it's now 4 drives in a row over nearly 2 quarters of play for the Eagles, where they're dominating and the Saints are doing nothing. The Eagles have absolutely nothing to show for it. Next drive after that, surely the Eagles get it right. No, 36-yard drive ends in a punt block. And so, I mean, now we're into the late third quarter. The Eagles are going up and down the field. They have absolutely nothing to show for it, and the Saints are hanging around. Lead 7-6 for Philadelphia as we get into the fourth quarter. Eagles ended up conceding a touchdown drive. There was a 50-yarder going back because they settled for a 60-yarder. In that scenario, I don't know what you're doing settling for a 60-yard field goal. So you have weird decision number 2. You go back to Sunday Night Football last week. It's number 3 in a row for Sirianni in 2 games, just completely overthinking everything. The Saints end up going up 12-6. And then, of course, the Eagles end up bailing themselves out. There's the big Goddard catch. They end up getting into the end zone. They win. They get the pick at the end to seal it. It's redemption for the Atlanta game. But now we're left with looking at this game and saying, like, what in the world do we do with the Philadelphia Eagles? They're very much a favorite in how these 3 games played out to be 3-0, and we're talking about them in a very different light. Instead of it, they were nearly 1-2. They end up 2-1, and you're looking at this, and it is a head scratcher. Now, key takeaways from this as we're looking at it, I think Vic Fangio playing with a 5-man front was very interesting. It was a bit of a quirk, a bit of a curveball, stayed in base for the majority of the game, but used a linebacker down and completely stifled the run. What I think about this that stands out as we go forward, if we go back to 2021, Vic Fangio, then with the Broncos, went into Dallas, and the Cowboys were red hot. They were just dominating and blowing up every team in the league. It was deemed the Fangio blueprint in how to defend Dallas because he was the first defensive mind that shut down the Dallas Cowboys in 2021. The Chiefs used the game plan later on in the season in December, and then the 49ers used it in the playoffs. And there was a lot of talk and a lot of reference to the Fangio blueprint that really got the Cowboys staff pretty upset because they were trying to downplay it, but his coverages were stolen and used by other teams to shut down a really good offense when it mattered, when they had the personnel to do so. The Saints dominate week 1 and 2 offensively. They had no answer to the front that Philadelphia was throwing at them. They couldn't run the football. Alvin Kamara ends up with just 87 yards on 26 touches. It allowed them to get more pressure. We saw Derek Carr went under pressure. He folds. It was a very bad game for him. And so now that this is out there, and now that this has been shown, and now that the Saints are potentially without their best offensive lineman at center, Eric McCoy, going forward, who has lost to injury, is this a look that other teams who are able to do it are going to force on the Saints to slow down the run game? Now, there's a big liability that comes with it in the pass game, but if you can stop the run and get pressure on the Saints, this is what I was expecting the Cowboys front to do to the Saints. And we saw very different Saints offense against those different looks. And as great and dynamic as they have been, they didn't have an answer for it. So the Eagles get away with the win, but it might be more damning that the Saints couldn't have a counterpunch to that going forward than anything else coming out of this game. But that was a horrendous offensive performance for the Saints, who just had no answer, but the scoreboard makes it look a whole lot better than it actually was. Denver 26, Tampa 7. This was something we talked about on the preview. This was a spot that looked like a great opportunity for the Broncos offense to get going, and it certainly did. They leaned on the run to kind of take the burden off of Bo Nix. That freed him up. He has had a great quick passing performance, was accurate. He used his legs at key times to extend plays. This was great by the Denver Broncos. I think the big takeaway that you have to take from this is 2 things. One, the Buccaneers defense is riddled with injuries. This is not anywhere close to what the Bucs defense is and should be. And until they get Vita Vea and Kancey and guys in the secondary around Winfield back, like there's so many key pieces missing here. Last week against the Lions, they were very close to being just absolutely ripped apart, and they managed to get a lot of red zone luck go their way. They were on the field for 83 plays, gave up a ton of yardage. In this game, it just showed that these injuries really matter. And so it's a key injury report to watch going forward, because this Bucs defense in its current form with the current players is going to struggle against almost anybody. So that's key takeaway number 1. Key takeaway number 2 is that the Denver Broncos defense could be kind of sneaky and underrated. Now, this was a Bucs offense that was performing well on the metrics. There was a lot of luck kind of underlying in their numbers that show that probably wasn't sustainable, specifically on late downs. And we saw all of that reversed today, but it was kind of exaggerated by the Broncos defense. So Tampa Bay, 3 of 11 on 3rd down, 0 for 2 on 4th down. I don't know if this was a mistake in the numbers that were reported, because I've never seen a number this bad for as many plays. Tampa Bay finished minus 1.95 EPA per play on 12 late down pass attempts. Again, it could be an error. You never see numbers that bad. And this Bucs team last year, all year, was crazy good on third and fourth down, and it just completely skewed their numbers. Weeks 1 and 2 this year on a per play basis and what they were getting out of third and fourth down were trending very high. But we talked about how Kevin Cole identified, it's like, look, Baker Mayfield's overperforming based on some of these luck metrics more than any other QB through 2 weeks. That's got to come down, and it absolutely did. But the Broncos, again, just forced everything short. As it stands right now, Baker Mayfield, dead last in terms of intended air yards per throw and dead last per caught air yards per throw of any QB who has played this week. So when that performance kind of meets its level and you get Bo Nix with his best performance as a pro, the Buccaneers were outgained by 1.5 yards per play, 130 overall, and 2.7 per pass. I mean, it was dominant from the Broncos wire to wire, controlled the game from start to finish. Green Bay 30, Tennessee 14. This was a surprise for many as the Tennessee Titans took on a ton of money. The Packers survive another game without Jordan Love, who looks ready to come back next week in a game that they need him against the Minnesota Vikings, where we may see the NFC North power shift kind of equal itself out. We'll talk about that in openers in just a second. Game was out of reach early. I mean, this was not competitive. The Packers put up 6.5 yards per play. They outgained the Titans by 1.9 per pass. It was never even close. They went run heavy again, 188 yards on 37 carries, 5.1 yards a rush for the Packers against the Titans, who looked great in week 1 and 2 defending the run. I don't know what's going on with Tennessee. We had a whole offseason where they were talking about tempo, and they were talking about 3 wide receiver sets, and they were talking about this massive kick up in pass rate over expectation. 3 weeks now, we haven't seen it. And it's very likely being hindered by Will Levis. I very rarely recall a coach this visibly upset on the sideline with his quarterback. Is it a younger coach who's inexperienced as a head coach, letting too many things show? I don't know. It just feels like it's a bad scenario right now with the Titans offense, and we're seeing none of what they wanted the identity to be in the offseason. Another just brutal pick six thrown by Levis where he telegraphed a hitch route to the sideline, was way late on the throw, was an easy pick six the other way for the Packers. It's just all kinds of different levels of bad for the Titans offense right now. And some of these turnovers are just leaving you scratching your head at the end of the game. And so, like, I don't know what to think of this Titans offense going forward, but it is tough to watch and tough to look at. And I wonder, even though he said post-game Callahan did that he's not going to Mason Rudolph, we heard the Panthers say the same thing about not going to Andy Dalton, and look how that turned out. And so maybe there is a switch coming. We'll have to see. Carolina 26 on the road. I should say 36 on the graphic. Carolina 36 on the road at Las Vegas 22. It is a Panthers win. Folks in the chat were rejoicing at the top of the show. That just looked like a completely different team. And you talk about a head coach going out of his way early in a tenure to just make a brazen and brash decision. To see the team on both sides of the football buy in like that, I think is certainly telling and certainly gives you optimism that the Panthers now are better than that 5.5 win team that looked a lot like a 1.5 win team for 2 weeks. Now going forward with Dalton under center. There's been one quarterback in 3 weeks of the NFL to throw for at least 300 yards and at least 3 touchdowns. His name is Andy Dalton. It's a big turnaround for the Panthers on both sides of the football. Certainly some of that is aided by their opponent in the Las Vegas Raiders, who could get nothing going on offense. But it was an early lead for the Panthers. It was a 21-7 lead at halftime, and one that they sat on and just looked like a completely different team. The run game came alive. Chuba Hubbard, 114 yards on 21 carries. You had Deontay Johnson finally looking like the number 1 wide receiver he was brought in to be. I mean, everything was clicking. The only negative to take away from this game for the Panthers is that Adam Thielen suffers a hamstring injury. We know that he and Dalton have a very strong connection. So it is a big win for the Panthers on the road to reset their season. 437 total yards of offense, 6.2 yards per play, 7.8 yards per pass, 4.2 yards per rush, nearly 1 yard better per play and per pass and per rush in all categories. A clean sweep for Carolina on the road in all of the metrics. That was a dominating win. Speaking of dominating wins, we had the Seattle Seahawks 24, Miami 3 in a game that was never competitive and was never close. A bit surprising to see the Dolphins no-show for another week on offense. And now they have serious problems because the big news is that Skylar Thompson goes down and they have to get his shoulder pads off, the shirt up for him to be able to breathe. Reminded me a bit of Mike White in some scenarios, the recent seasons where he was getting blown up in the pocket. But now you take out Skylar Thompson, you have Tim Boyle. Tim Boyle is a downgrade from Thompson and his history in the system. I mean, it's not significant, but now we're looking at the Dolphins probably with the worst quarterback situation in the league. And like you're looking at this box score, and it's 1 for 12 on third down, 0 for 3 on fourth down, 3.7 yards per play, just 3.6 yards per rush, and 65 total rushing yards. There's no offense here, despite the speed, despite the skill. And even with Boyle in the pocket, it's kind of like a distributor and just like a game manager. The ceiling here is really low for what they can do. And Mike McDaniel on the sideline, I don't want to say he looks checked out, but it's just detached from what is going on the field now 2 games in a row. Seattle leads this game 17-3 at the end of the first quarter. That comes off the heels of a missed field goal for the Dolphins on their first drive of the game. So, I mean, technically could have been a little bit tighter in the first quarter, but after the big explosive play, a 71-yard touchdown from Geno to DK Metcalf, I mean, that was it. Seahawks sit on the lead the rest of the game, try to push the run game a little bit. Now you're still dealing with the backup in Charbonnet, but he gets 18 touches for 91 yards. And it's just Seahawks running out the game and running out the clock because the Dolphins couldn't move the ball on offense. Now, equally concerning perhaps for injuries, you lose Byron Murphy, and you also lose Williams for the Seahawks in the middle of the defensive line. And so you lose 2 starters. The Nwosu's already banged up. And perhaps this is, I mean, it's on one hand concerning for the Seahawks because you lose key guys up front. But then also, like, how damning is that for Miami, who couldn't get anything going on the ground, even with those guys out, an incredibly highly rated defensive line down guys. You would think that the Dolphins would have had more success. They can't get anything going. And so where does this leave Miami is a big question. Detroit 20, Arizona 13. Talk about a game that fell off a cliff. First half, both teams are going up and down the field. Second half, 3 points total scored in this game. We're looking at the Arizona Cardinals, and I don't want to keep kind of reiterating the same point over and over, but it is just very obvious what we're getting from Arizona Cardinals games. Week 1, they face a Bills team that goes heavy personnel, runs the football between the tackles, stays consistent with it. They end up hanging a big number. Week 2, they have a Rams team that can't do that because they're blown up on the offensive line. Week 3, they get a Lions team that can do what the Bills did, but do it at a better level. And you see David Montgomery, 23 carries for 105. Jahmyr Gibbs, 16 carries for 83. In total, the Lions ran the football 43 times for 187 yards. That's how you beat the Arizona Cardinals. I mean, it's so straightforward. And you talk about Ben Johnson last week, 50-plus pass attempts against the beat-up Buccaneers secondary. This week, against that weakness of the Cardinals, he runs the football 43 times, passes it just 23. So you have just crazy swings in game plans and pass run ratio. It kind of reminds me of what you got betting on Sean Payton like 10 years ago with the Saints at the peak of Drew Brees, where he was the one guy that was game planning week to week that you could absolutely bet would target the weakness. So if you're thinking about the Lions for props, if you're thinking about them in certain matchup spots, it's a very good team to handicap in that perspective because you're starting to see a lot of trust from the offensive play caller and what you're going to get. And they just went at the weakness of Arizona, and there's no answers there. There's not going to be for Arizona all season long. Now, perhaps concerningly here was what happened to the Arizona offense in the second half as they just completely disappeared. They throw the pick right out of the gate, but then it's a punt, turnover on downs, punt, turnover on downs, punt, and then a mercy field goal late in the game where the Lions ease up a little bit on defense. I mean, completely disappeared. It's a game that I definitely have to look at a little bit more and figure out exactly what happened in the second half. But that was kind of concerning to see them just completely disappear. Kyler Murray didn't have a lot to do with his legs in the second half, which is something you want to take in an Aaron Glenn defense. It was like the offense got completely turned off in the second half. So disappointing to see that game finish how it did relative to the total, as that was certainly looking like one that was going to fly over in the first half. Baltimore 28, Dallas 25. This is another one of those games that tightened up a little bit late. This was never nearly as competitive as it looks. Dallas benefits from the onside kick. They benefit from a couple of flags late to put up 19 points in the fourth quarter. But this was a game that was 28-6 through three quarters, with the Ravens absolutely dominating. And still, even with the Cowboys padding their numbers in the fourth quarter in a big way, Ravens put up 456 to 412 for Dallas, 7.6 yards per play to 5.9. The Ravens outgained the Cowboys by 12.1 yards per pass for Lamar Jackson and the Ravens to just 6.7 for the Cowboys, and the Ravens ran for 6.1 yards per rush to just 3.2 for the Cowboys. It reads like a field goal game. In reality, it was a lot closer to a 3-touchdown win for the Ravens, and a dominant one in that. The Cowboys defensively had no answers. We finally saw Derrick Henry break out, 25 carries for 150 yards, 2 touchdowns. Lamar Jackson on his legs, 87 yards on 14 carries. Didn't even have to throw it that much. We now saw the Ravens do exactly what the Packers did in the playoffs. We saw the Ravens do what the Saints did a week ago to the Cowboys. And this Dallas defense that looked really promising in week 1 against the Browns has reverted to look like the playoff Cowboys defense of last year in the last 2 weeks against opponents that just lined up in heavier personnel, ran the football right at them, and the Cowboys just have no answer for it on defense. So a 3-point win for the Ravens that certainly played out and read to be a lot bigger than that. LA Rams 27, San Francisco 24. This was a game we talked about a lot in the preview podcast, where you're going to get the all-in effort from McVay. You're going to have the first time in the Shanahan-McVay rivalry where Shanahan didn't know what was coming. And early on, he weathered the storm well, because the Rams went, again, we'll see the personnel numbers after. I would guess this is the highest rate ever used by Sean McVay of 2 tight end sets. I mean, he was operating out of them a ton. Don't know what that'll translate into percentage-wise, but I will be curious to see. And the 49ers were able to weather it early on. I thought those first 2 drives for San Francisco, there were some good breaks there. Niners get out to a 14-0 lead. It was a 13-play, 77-yard drive and an 8-play, 70-yard drive. But there were some flags aiding that. It was a generous 14-0. Some big third downs converted by the 49ers. That's what it was, and the Rams hung around. They got a big touchdown drive, 16 plays for 87 yards to cut it to 14-7. And then they benefited from a Purdy sack fumble late in the second quarter, as it looked like the 49ers were driving in for more points. They get out of it. 49ers get back up to a 2-touchdown lead, but then it's a missed field goal late once the 49ers are up 24-17 with under 3 minutes to play. That would have made it a 10-score game, would have put it out of reach. Rams come back right away, 3 plays for 55 yards. There was a really big gain by Tutu Atwell for 50 yards just before the 2-minute warning to set the Rams up. And then it was the big kickoff return that set up the Rams for the field goal. So it's just, it was similar to what we saw Sunday Night Football week 1, where it was McVay working with what he got, and him and Stafford came through and just delivered a traditional McVay scheme genius performance that, although it wasn't incredibly explosive and efficient, was enough with the personnel that they had to get away with a win and stay alive in the NFC West. Because if this was another loss in the division for the Rams going to 0-3, that's a pretty dire scenario. And now it's the 49ers looking up as they're trying to figure out what they do with injuries, with Kittle, Samuel, CMC, all banged up. And this is a team that you just see the limitations that they have and how everything needs to go right with all of these guys out. And they just have no room for hiccups. And so this is a 49ers team that's in a bit of a tight scenario. Interesting Sunday. Again, not the most entertaining, but some games to take away that just leave you with a lot of questions. Some injuries to look at as we go through. Cleveland lost Wyatt Teller. They already have questions about Jedrick Wills and Jack Conklin on the offensive line. James Hudson was a backup offensive lineman, so O-line issues for the Browns. Myles Garrett, he has issues with both of his feet. He's playing through it. It seems debilitating at this point. I don't know if he's getting surgery in season, if they're going to shut him down, if he's going to go all year. That looks like a tough situation to navigate. The Chargers, obviously Justin Herbert's a status to keep an eye on, re-aggravated the ankle injury. Rashawn Slater, great offensive lineman. Joe Alt left the game. Slater seems much more serious with the pec. Haven't seen anything for Alt officially. Joey Bosa, hip injury ruled out. So you've got some key guys for the Chargers. The Saints, as I mentioned, Eric McCoy, he's their best offensive lineman. He's the center. Once he went out, the Eagles front just went to another level as they were able to get that interior pressure. Something to watch for with the Saints, knowing how sensitive Carr is to pressure. Eagles lost Devonta Smith. You take him out of the equation without A.J. Brown, that's a problem. That was a vicious hit. Concussion for him, I would imagine he goes into the protocol. That seems like a tough game to come back from next week, and we already have some anticipation that Brown is going to miss. Blaine Johnson and Mekhi Becton both went down on the offensive line. Eagles have some serious injury problems. That's a big report to watch. Steelers lost Alex Highsmith, a great linebacker. Carolina lost Adam Thielen to a hamstring injury. He did not return. Miami, as we talked about, lost Skylar Thompson. Ribs, couldn't breathe. Doesn't seem like an injury he comes back from a week later. They also lost Teron Armstead, their best offensive lineman on the left tackle position. Seattle loses Leonard Williams and Byron Murphy, both key guys on the defensive line. Lions lose Sam Laporta, tight end, to a hamstring. And then Arizona loses Trey McBride, their tight end. He is in concussion protocol. So some big injuries to watch for heading into week number 4. Let's get to the opening lines reaction. There's 2 Monday nighters. There's the Sunday nighter. 6 games with 16 or 3 games with 6 teams involved. So some lines not off the board, but let's look at what we have and we'll talk about it as we go. Thursday night football. Wow. The Cowboys are 4.5-point favorites now at Chris on the road at the New York Giants. The Giants win at Cleveland. The Cowboys lose. Pretty embarrassing fashion. Look ahead was 7. The Cowboys are 4.5-point favorites on the road at the New York Giants. Interesting number. Wow. Was not expecting that big of an adjustment. Getting to the Sunday games. I'm laughing at that one. Steelers on the road at the Indianapolis Colts. The Steelers are a 1.5-point favorite. This was Indy 1 on the look ahead. So the Steelers win, go to 3-0. Justin Fields looks good. The Indianapolis Colts can't get anything going on offense. You have Anthony Richardson, shaky decision-making, facing a Steelers defense that looks phenomenal. The Steelers are in desperate need of stacking wins early in the season. They were 2-0 coming into this week. Their preseason win total was 8.5. Their current win total prior to kickoff today was still 8.5. This latter 8 weeks for Pittsburgh is brutal. So they need wins in an urgent manner here early in the season. Colts have a ton of defensive injuries and just are giving up a ton of yardage. So you would think, like we saw the Packers run the football, Steelers are going to find similar success. And do you trust Anthony Richardson against this Steelers defensive front? Jacksonville, Houston, still off of the board as Jacksonville plays tomorrow night. Houston was a 4.5-point favorite in this game. You would expect if the Jags are competitive and cover against the Bills, this would open lower after seeing what the Houston Texans look like. If that's the case and the Jags lose but cover, I would think we see 4 on the reopen. Minnesota, -2.5 on the look ahead. This is still not open on the road at Green Bay. There's speculation, obviously, about what are we going to get from Jordan Love. That look ahead number of Vikings -2.5 was set under the anticipation that Jordan Love would miss this game. That is not Vikings -2 in Green Bay is not a Jordan Love is in look ahead number. This realistically, if Love plays, should be Packers -3. We'll see what it fully opens at when it's available. Perhaps even a little bit higher than that could be justified. But certainly, I mean, Minnesota's getting pro money every week. Last 2 weeks, they've been hammered. Green Bay's getting away with wins with Willis. Love comes back. How healthy is he? Was he rushed back from injury? I think is a bigger question for handicapping. A lot of data that says if you come back early with those injuries, you typically have a level of play that's slightly lower. That's something to keep in mind. And so, like, with the combination of the pro money on the Vikings, with that being assumed a little bit, like, you're probably not getting to that initial adjustment from Love to Willis, which was like 8.5 points. You're not going to see this go from Vikings 2.5 on the look ahead to like Packers -5 the other way as the true adjustment, because we're just in different scenarios with each. So it's going to be tighter. I would think 3.5 if Love is in and good to go is where we probably start the betting in this game. Cincinnati, Carolina, still off of the board with the Bengals playing tomorrow. This is going to be kind of a wild game to set. Bengals were 7-point favorites on the look ahead. There's been some Washington money a little bit leaking into the market the last couple days for tomorrow night's game. Washington's competitive. You have the Panthers win, the Panthers season reset. This is going to be a tough number to set. So I'm curious to see what we might get from this late tomorrow night or Tuesday morning. Rams on the road at the Chicago Bears. Bears were 4-point favorites on the look ahead. They're down to -1 in this game. Total from 41.5 down to 40. Okay. We saw the Rams. That you're going to see the win probability graph for the 49ers Rams game, and it's going to be just like stacked up on top, red near the 90% point for the majority of the game, and then it's just going to spike to blue at the very far right end of the chart, because the Rams win was that unbelievable to come back in that fashion that they didn't get the win. So you're going to see that. We saw what the Rams put out there, or obviously Eberflus and the Bears would. We did too. But what do the Rams do now? Because they're not going to have Kupp back. They're not going to have Nakua back. They still have O-line guys on IR. When you look at the numbers for the Rams overall against that 49ers defense, it was 5.4 yards per play. They were outgained by 1.1 yards per play. They were outgained by 135 yards total. They were outgained by nearly 3 yards per pass. They were outgained per rush. The 49ers had 111 penalty yards. My point is, what's the counterpunch to that for the Rams going into Chicago? You're not indoors. You're not on turf. That's different in that spot. So let's see if that number now has been adjusted down quite a bit for the Bears, and we saw their offense break out a little bit. Denver Broncos on the road at the New York Jets. The Jets 8-point favorites on the look ahead. They reopen as 8-point favorites. I could see the Broncos potentially being a team of interest to some bettors. The thing with the Jets is they just play so slow, so calculated. You get to these bigger numbers against better defenses like the Broncos seemingly have. There's probably, with these short totals of 38.5, going to be dog money. We've seen it the first 3 weeks, so maybe this comes in a little bit. I don't know how many folks initially on my reaction here are going to run and grab the Jets -8. I'm not advocating for the Broncos, but this seems like a spot where there could be some early interest in Denver, just the way some of these games above a touchdown with short totals have been being bet. Philadelphia on the road at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This was a pick 'em on the look ahead. The Eagles are now 2.5-point favorites on the road, taking on Mayfield and the Bucs. Total in this game 47.5, adjusted down to 46. As I mentioned, the Eagles have so many injuries. I'm a little bit surprised to see this number go the direction that it did with those injuries still in question. If you put an Eagles team on the field without Brown and without Smith, and you're down Lane Johnson on the offensive line, if the Bucs have Vita Vea back, if the Bucs have Kancey back on the defensive line, that's a tough game plan for the Eagles and Jalen Hurts. Now, if the Bucs don't have those guys, it seems pretty straightforward for the Eagles, and you would think that they're going to rely on Saquon Barkley, going to rely on Dallas Goedert. There's not a lot there for the Bucs to get stops, but this will very much depend on the Bucs injury report. This, to me, initially feels like it's a hair big for the Eagles, an adjustment just based on how many injuries that they're dealing with. I'm surprised to see it go that way. Washington, Arizona still off of the board. Washington plays tomorrow night. New England on the road at the San Francisco 49ers. 49ers 10.5-point favorites with a total in this game of 40. San Francisco adjusted up from 9.5 to 10.5. So despite the misleading box score relative to the final, we are looking at the 49ers in this game getting a bump. So that is pushed up a little bit. Despite that, that's largely just because the New England Patriots are a team that looked like the team we expected them to be in the preseason against the Jets on Thursday Night Football. So nothing being missed here by the market as you're looking at that final box score from the San Francisco 49ers LA Rams game. Cleveland on the road at the Las Vegas Raiders. Both teams underperform. Both teams disappoint as favorites. Vegas was a 6-point favorite. Browns were a 6.5-point favorite. Both lose outright. This game was Browns -1 on the look ahead. Reopens -1. Total 39.5. Reopens 39 flat. No opinion at all on this game as I struggle to figure out what in the world the Cleveland Browns are. Yeah, don't have much here for you guys. Sorry. Kansas City on the road at the LA Chargers off the board with the Chiefs kicking off now and hopefully driving down the field. I don't know who got the balls. The game just got kicked off. Buffalo, Baltimore still off of the board as well as the Bills play tomorrow night, Monday Night Football. This was Ravens -1.5 on the look ahead. Chiefs -3. Even if the Chiefs lose outright, I would surely think that this 3 gets adjusted up with Herbert not 100%. With O-line question marks, with Bosa, I would have to think this opens higher than 3, certainly. In terms of what we get from the Ravens-Bills, no initial opinion on that one. And it's another Monday night doubleheader. Tennessee on the road at Miami. Dolphins 2.5-point favorites on the look ahead. Oh, man. Titans a 1-point favorite at open. Total 39.5 down to 37.5. I hate the Titans so much. How can you bet the Dolphins with Tim Boyle in this spot? Boy, oh boy, oh boy. It's almost like this reminds me of Panthers Raiders before the Dalton news, where you're like, you can't bet Raiders -7 even if it is Bryce Young. Like, do you really want to bet the Panthers with Bryce Young? And my answer was no. You can't bet the Dolphins +1 in this game with Tim Boyle and the injuries on the O-line. But boy, you could. Who can lay a point with the Titans on the road? That certainly seems. That's tough. That's a tough number right there. So we'll see how this game develops, and we get some more injury news. But that is tough to look at. Seattle. This will be a fun one. Seattle on the road at the Detroit Lions. Lions 4.5-point favorites on the look ahead. Reopened 4.5. Total 48.5. That is now down to 48 flat. Not much movement in this game. Initially, it's the probably most respected non-head coach offensive play calling mind in the NFL versus the youngest and brightest defensive mind that's taking over as a young head coach in Seattle. A great matchup between Johnson and McDonald in this game. Seattle defensive injuries concern me a little bit against the run of the Lions, which they got back to. We talked about Johnson going after a weakness, and that would certainly be it if you're missing those key guys up front for the Seahawks. This is obviously going to be a day delayed for the injury report, but that initially in my mind seems like a pretty big advantage for the Lions to have up front. But 4.5, right where it was expected to be on the open, perhaps not accounting fully for those injuries. So an interesting look, certainly. All right, that'll do it for the Week 3 recap, Week 4 look ahead. I went 8 minutes over expected. I was trying to get done by kickoff of the Sunday Night Football game. The Cowboys game went a little bit longer, so it took into it, but that'll be the goal as we go forward with these live streams. Appreciate everybody for stopping by. Again, I'll get better at answering some of these questions in the live chat as we go, but as always, if you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel, you can do so down below. Let me know your comments in the comment section down below after the video airs if you have something that you want me to answer right away or look more into. If you're on Apple or Spotify and you want to do the same, you can hop over to the YouTube channel. If you're watching on YouTube and you want to listen to the daily podcast on the go, you can also obviously listen on Apple or Spotify too. The show's going everywhere. I hope you guys are enjoying it. I hope you guys are having a fantastic Sunday as well. Enjoy the Sunday Night Football game, guys. We will talk to you bright and early on Tuesday morning for the next episode of the podcast.